Okay. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, cool. Well, we have a lot of registrations. People will probably continue to roll in. We wanted to go ahead and start since everyone's joining over their lunch break. I'm Valerie Jones. I'm one of the co-directors of the Smart Lab that stands for Social and Traditional Media Analytics and Research Tools. It's housed here at the College of Journalism and Mass Communications. And I'm joined by co-director Brian Wong, Associate Dean Corey Armstrong, and our consultant friend Lisa Pitlick-Zillig, and a number of presenters and people have come to join us today to learn about social media. So I'll keep this super short, the little Smart Lab piece super short. We exist to power interdisciplinary research and industry insights through social media data, well, any kind of media data really that's been digitized. And so we provide access to digitized media data in a centralized way. We saw researchers using this kind of across campuses and thought there was an opportunity to provide an easier way to harvest the data that you want, to be able to see if it's what you want, so that you can act on it more quickly. We provide expertise, so we work with folks in the lab who have expertise with media analysis and can help you with that. We do training and workshops as well as experiences for students and for faculty researchers, and using tools like this that are used in both industry and academic practice. And so earlier this year, we gave out a round of inaugural seed data grants. So people from across campuses and across disciplines applied with fantastic projects that needed some social media data. We worked with them to provide that. And now we have many of them here to join us today to talk a little bit about their projects, and we asked them to join wherever they were in the process. And so they may be at the very beginning and kind of just starting to dig into the data. They may have some initial analysis, but this is all meant to highlight what can be done with social media data in a variety of disciplines with a variety of research questions. So without further ado, I will hand it off to our first presenter, Dr. Sean Cross. And so I will introduce folks, and then you can go ahead and share your slides. You should be able to take controls to do that. If you can't, let me know and I'll pull up your slides. But Dr. Cross is an assistant professor in the College of Public Health at UNMC in the Department of Environmental, Agricultural, and Occupational Health. He's particularly interested in vector-borne diseases, particularly those that are carried by ticks, such as alpha-gal syndrome. And so that is something that I did not know a whole lot about a year ago, and I know a little bit more now. So Sean is going to take us through some of his kind of initial analysis. Thanks so much, Sean.
Perfect. Thanks, Valerie. I really appreciate it. Okay. So I am one of those investigators that's probably a little bit more in the earlier stages of the analysis. So we have still found some really interesting data, but we'll highlight that as I'm getting started. So before we kind of jump into alpha-gal syndrome and what alpha-gal syndrome is, I just kind of want to highlight the fact that we are focused on tick-borne diseases. And tick-borne diseases are this unrelenting threat to human health. A really important public health aspect. The amount of cases of tick-borne diseases are increasing every year. And this is kind of my obligatory video that I like to put out there. So this is a tick. It's called questing. So it's looking for a host, and then it crawls across the skin, kind of getting ready to take a blood meal. And although there are a lot of different diseases caused by ticks that are caused by a certain microbe or pathogen, there are also an emerging disease that's actually an allergy that's caused by the tick. And so this allergy is called alpha-gal syndrome. It's colloquially referred to as the red meat allergy. And so this happens when an individual is bitten by a tick. It's typically a Lone Star tick, but it could be a number of different types of ticks. And the allergy will develop after a few weeks to months. And the allergy is to this sugar modification, which is mostly commonly found in mammalian meats, dairies, and other mammalian byproducts. And the thing that's hard about alpha-gal syndrome and why it's kind of this emerging issue is that it doesn't have the typical manifestations of allergies. So when you eat, one of these byproducts or ingest one of these byproducts, then they will usually have a few hours before they have a reaction. And it can be a normal allergic reaction that you'd imagine, such as hives or anaphylactic shock. But there's also a lot of just gastrointestinal issues that make it really hard to distinguish that is not typical of normal allergies. And although, again, of course, here in Nebraska, this is a big issue, thinking about the cattle industry and swine as well, for what this looks like in terms of, selling and also eating and ingesting red meat. Here I want to highlight in this little diagram that is made by AGI, is the fact that a lot of pharmaceutical aspects are also impacted by the fact that they're made with animal byproducts. And so a lot of individuals now can no longer ingest or take certain types of medication because they will have allergic reactions to the medications. And like I said, it's predominantly caused by the Lone Star tick, which is merging into new areas because of climate change. This is a map from the CDC that the yellow is where they're currently at, whereas the blue arrows are kind of my generalized indication of where these ticks are moving with climate change, and they're mostly moving northward, and it's both northeast and northwest. And just for kind of the fact that we're here in Nebraska, I just want to highlight that we do have these ticks in Nebraska. So just be very diligent and careful when you're out there. Use your proper tick protection, but don't be afraid to necessarily go outside either. But what we're really interested in is a number of aspects on alpha-gal syndrome. And, this opportunity came up, and I was thinking about how it would be really interesting to understand how is the general public receiving alpha-gal syndrome. And so we wanted to understand, could we use social media data to leverage questions regarding awareness, trends, perceptions, whatever it might be. And so I was grateful to be able to be awarded one of these projects. And in this, we were able to mine roughly 12,000 social media posts, mostly coming from X or Twitter, although we do have a handful that were coming from Reddit as well. And this is due to the nature of that we were kind of doing some retrospective acquisition of the data. It's interesting that the engagement seems to be pretty much equally split between males and females. About a third of people did not report if they're male or female on their social media account. But the fact that males and females are roughly split 50-50 for those that did report, you can probably make a little bit of assumption that the missing are most likely equally split between those as well as in terms of reporting. Um, we also noticed that in the sentiment of what we're looking through with this data, that most of the posts were of a negative sentiment, which probably shouldn't be surprising. We're talking about a disease that's impacting people's outcome, a disease that either they're concerned about. I feel like a lot of ticks and tick bite sort of things. We don't like to think about ticks in a happy manner, so it's maybe not surprising that a lot of these posts are a negative sentiment. One thing we were really interested in understanding is what is the trend across time, and really, do we see these interactions occur overlapping with tick seasons? So ticks are most active during the summertime, and we wanted to understand, are they also then causing this kind of knowledge and awareness so that people will talk about these sort of diseases, specifically alpha-gal syndrome, during the peak tick season? Interestingly, it actually seems that there seems to be generally about the same amount of discussion about alpha-gal syndrome, regardless of the time of the year. The big kind of outlier that we're seeing here is May 2024. There was a lot of individuals that were discussing about alpha-gal syndrome. I haven't taken the time to figure out if was there a big news story or whatever it may be that has linked to this. But we did also notice in May of this year as well, also a slightly higher peak. And May, I would say, is kind of your first bad tick month. This is when people are going to really start experiencing tick bites, and so it's kind of that acknowledgement, oh, ticks are back, and kind of that awareness. And so it might be a few factors there, but it was interesting that it doesn't seem to be totally dependent upon the tick season for the awareness and discussion about these. We also have data for posts that did share where they were located when they were posting about this. And we wanted to understand which states or which locations with the United States seem to have the most engagement of posting. And it was really interesting that there do seem to be some super states that are really posting a lot about alpha-gal syndrome. So Missouri and West Virginia are posting a lot. There are still a number of individual states that do post, but we also have states that don't post as much, like these upper Mountain West states like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, which might not be surprising that they aren't really thinking about this because the Lone Star tick is not in the area. Again, there are other ticks that do cause this, but also the amount of cases within these states is very little. And so there might not just be an awareness because they don't experience the fact this as a public health concern to them. Whereas cases like Missouri, the darker blue indicates more suspected cases, and this is coming from a group that was combined with the CDC. There are a lot of cases in Missouri. So this is kind of an example of a state that is very alpha-gal burdened and alpha-gal aware. But what's also interesting is, again, the other super state here was West Virginia. But if we look at West Virginia in terms of cases, yes, they have alpha-gal, but it's not nearly to the extent as some of the neighboring areas like Virginia itself or some of these other kind of central and southern states. And so this is kind of this interesting phenomenon that we've experienced and talked about with other individuals, and they've also noted is this alpha-gal aware state, but not necessarily alpha-gal burdened state. And so this kind of is still aligning with this idea that we're noticing that there are states that might know a lot about alpha-gal, but aren't necessarily burdened. We have states that are burdened by alpha-gal and are engaging in alpha-gal. But the concern that we're seeing from the social media data are states that might be burdened but not aware. So Kansas, for example, doesn't have a lot of posts, but there is becoming continual increase in terms of cases of alpha-gal. And so this might be an area for us to kind of leverage this to understand how, from a public health standpoint, where do we target our education efforts to try to increase education awareness about this disease. So in the future direction, again, this was just kind of a general analysis. We want to look at the bivariate correlations to see if certain topics co-occur more together. Like, do we always see the tick get mentioned with the disease, or other certain things about the disease? We want to analyze this by themes, and so understanding education versus healthcare, prevention, and then additionally, we have a strong interest in understanding how do occupations impact the outcomes of tick-borne diseases, especially within farmers, given we're here in Nebraska. And so we kind of also want to see, is it potential for us to mine through this data to see if people will admit this is my type of occupation or this is the area I work in, and see if we can pull that data from these tweets as well, and then be able to link that to the sort of occupations that are most likely to engage in this as well. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge members of my lab, especially Alex Welch, who is the graduate student that has really done a lot of this work and is leading the charge here. But of course, like to thank the Smart Lab, thank Dr. Jones, Dr. Wong, Dr. Armstrong, and definitely thank Akib, who is the graduate assistant who has did a fantastic job of generating this data for us. Thank you to the Smart Lab for our funding and for other sources for funding Alex's graduate student stipend. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much. That was great. And interesting to think about, yeah, that burden might not be the same as people's awareness as reflected in the conversation on social media. So we look forward to learning more about that and hopefully getting some more updates from you in the future. Thanks so much, Dr. Cross.
Thank you.
All right. So next we have Dr. Heather Aiken and Dr. Andy Little. Dr. Aiken is an assistant professor of strategic communication in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication within the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources at UNL. Her research and service focus on understanding the social and psychological dynamics underlying public's attitudes and behaviors related to science issues and risks. Dr. Andy Little is an associate professor of landscape ecology and habitat management and extension specialist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and director of the Applied Wildlife Ecology and Spatial Movement Awesome Lab. So that's a great acronym too, Andy. So kudos on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I do have Valerie. I do have my hat here to kind of show that. Yeah, we're
Oh, look at that. It's
with
a
the
rich
Awesome
history.
Lab at the University of Nebraska. So we always say we have awesome members, awesome students in our lab.
An
Yeah,
awesome
thanks
flag.
again. All
Go ahead.
right, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna just kind of give a little background, and then Heather's gonna go through some more details of some figures. So we're gonna talk about conservation marketing and use of social media around conservation agriculture. And so I'd like to first thank all the co-authors we have on here, including Heather, Gwender Meredith, Iris McFarland, who's my communication specialist in my lab, Crystal Powers, of course, Valerie, Brian, and Akib, as noted in the previous presentation. Thank you all so much for all the help that you guys have been able to provide over the past several months. All right.
I'll move that.
Oh, you're fine.
I like to see the audience too, but I never know where to put this. Okay.
So just to give a little bit of an overview, kind of our project goals. This project was birthed out of conversations that I've had with a number of conservation agencies. I work a lot with state, federal, and NGO organizations across Nebraska and beyond. And traditionally, what they are delivering for their outreach methods to landowners are a lot of mailers or workshops, kind of field days, kind of the traditional things as noted here. And so they may not always align with what the producers and landowners are actually talking about. And so that really led to this project saying, how can we essentially be more targeted in how we're disseminating information to individuals? What's the current conversations that are ongoing? How can we evaluate engagement and sentiment and message patterns and think about new innovative ways to strategically target information to landowners around, in our case, conservation programs, conservation initiatives, especially in a working landscape like Nebraska. And I'll just give a quick example. I've had agencies that have noted that they have a budget of a certain amount, say $50,000 to $100,000, and they're going to take and allocate that to marketing and communication to landowners. A lot of times that's actually just, hey, I'm going to send out mailers to them to make them aware of these potential programs. Well, the question then that we argued was, is that a good use of resources, and can that be improved? Are there ways to better target those limited resources so that you as an agency can be way more efficient in getting your message out to them? And so that really is what, again, give you a little background, what led to this project and some of the goals. And so the insights really that we're going to gain from this project and then kind of future funding will help us create more targeted and relevant information for these agencies and for these landowners so that they can have strategies to be able to best communicate and engage with landowners around conservation and working landscapes. So I'll turn it to Heather for that.
Okay, so I'm being very awkward with my pointer here, but I think Andy kind of set it up pretty well, and we're both at an extension meeting right now, which is coincidentally why we're in the same room and able to present together. But it's so fun to see many of you that I know on this and hear about the work you're doing. I think that Andy set that up well for kind of what we were looking at as kind of research questions, which I would describe as kind of working research questions that will continue to evolve as the team kind of comes back to this data. But we were really looking at like, what are people kind of talking about when it comes to conservation agriculture? What does that look like across the different major social media platforms that are available? Kind of what the sentiment overall about it, whether it's positive, negative, neutral, any specific emotions that are expressed in posts about conservation agriculture. And then further, this is kind of our beginning look that we're sharing today, but would like to dig more into the data to look at things like sentiment patterns across, to some degree across platforms or by particular users, or with those that are have high in some of the data. There's like an influencer score, but maybe looking a little bit more deeply about who's sharing what and what kind of emotion, sentiment, themes, some of the things Dr. Cross talked about too. I was writing down like, okay, yeah, that's something that we will want to look into as well. So that's sort of where we are with this right now. So you guys probably all know kind of the process here, but we worked closely with your amazing team at the Smart Lab to kind of put together this query that we had. I'll show you the query that we came up with in a moment here. And then with what I've looked at so far is basically just took the spreadsheet that we had, exported it into R, and used a few packages that are available that help you kind of analyze and mine text. I will note that I have done some social media analysis work before, but this was like such a fun learning opportunity. And if it's helpful to talk through any other members, other teams that are doing this, I found that it went a lot faster. I was using like AI tools to correct my code in a lot of cases, which helped me really speed things up by like many hours. But of course that can be problematic. And I found some new packages that I hadn't used before for text analysis. So I'm learning a lot as I'm going here, and I appreciate that opportunity. But some of you who have done this might have done similar steps here, but I did some things like tokenize the text, meaning break it down into words and into a kind of different data set of words to identify like recurring terms and words. I know that we get in the data set a sentiment score, but I was interested in trying out a tool in the tidy text R package that gives you a little bit more variability in sentiment, like kind of a score that I'll show in a moment. And also looking at emotions expressed, which I don't know how much we'll dig into this, but I was sort of interested in playing around with it myself. But using a lexicon library that codes certain words by specific emotions. But still noting there's still a lot of work to do ahead here. So this was our query we put together. Our whole team kind of put this together and had a fun dialogue over email about search terms. I remember at one point, we were talking about what social media platforms to include. And I think we even discussed at one point, should we include Reddit? And then Andy's grad assistant, Iris, was like, well, I did a little search and there's actually quite a bit of dialogue on Reddit. And it turned out that there was quite a bit that came up on Reddit. So very glad that we included that. But those are the social media platforms and the search terms that we used, which included like specific crop names so that we knew kind of that people were posting about agriculture and some different technologies and practices that are related to conservation agriculture. And to get the sample size that we wanted, we sort of thought about what dates to include, and we used a 2-year span of time, which would cover a couple of growing seasons when we thought people might be posting more frequently. I'll show, I think well, that's a slide away. But just to give you kind of a snapshot here, this was how it broke down in terms of the social media platforms that had posts. I'm a little intrigued by there only being 2 on Instagram, so kind of have some questions about that. I don't know if we just kind of say that was excluded from the analysis or what, but we did see a lot of conversation on Twitter, X, and Reddit, and some on Facebook and Blue Sky as well. This was kind of the trend we saw over time in terms of posts. You could ask me what's going on with this date sometime in August 2024, and I'm not sure what to tell you there, but maybe we can get our team together and brainstorm what might have look at some of the posts and see what was going on there to cause that spike. But this was kind of the trend over the 2 years of data that we collected. I also mapped it just to kind of see where this is all tweets, I think, because I think only Twitter captures latitude and longitude. Someone on the team can correct me if I'm wrong there, but this was only a partial subset of the full 10,000 posts. And this was Twitter. So we can kind of see, it's interesting, not surprisingly, all coming from states, that do a lot of agriculture. So nothing really surprising there. This is something we'll hopefully dive more deeply into because I think there's a lot more to investigate here. But I looked at a couple of, like what phrases were occurring most frequently on some of the different platforms to see if there are differences. And there are some errors in here, some cleaning that I think needs to be done. For instance, Facebook, there's like a blank word, and we obviously might not want to include these here, but we do see terms like cover crops, prairie strips, but some different kind of phrasing that occurs across those different platforms that are probably due to the nature of like what people post on those platforms in general, but also just kind of common like language that people use different across those platforms. So I have done in previous work before some sentiment analysis. I always love this one to see how it's like positive or negative. So beyond just the positive, negative, neutral that we got in the data set, I also used this AFIN sentiment analysis tool that gives you conveys a little bit more nuance to the sentiment expressed. And so this is across all the posts that we had. You can see kind of like where it goes from like more negative. There wasn't a lot. We saw a lot more kind of in the generally positive sentiment expressed about conservation agriculture in all the posts. So kind of different from the tick, the alpha gal, I'm going to say alpha gal, a little bit different sentiment expressed there. And then I feel like I'm running out of time. Also looked at the emotions expressed, and this was with another thing in the tidy text package in R that helps you use a specific lexicon of words associated with specific emotions. There are like 8 emotions that they're categorized into, but then they also include, it's sort of another version of looking at positive and negative. We kind of saw a lot of positive sentiment expressed again, but then some other commonalities we saw were trust. So I'm looking at Lisa, even though I can't actually see her because she's our trust scholar in the group. Also things like anticipation, joy, and some other emotions expressed about this topic. Okay, I'll note too that this was an analysis that looked at all the words, so across all the posts and all the words. So it's not necessarily looking at for a specific post, what's the most prominent emotion expressed. It was just across all the words and all the posts. So I kind of wanted to look at that a little bit differently and did some analysis of like the dominant emotion in each post. And that breaks down a little bit differently. We still see it still gives us positive and difference between positive and negative, but then trust, anticipation, disgust were also highly kind of high on the higher level there. So we have a lot more to do here. I think it'd be really cool to dig more into topics. We also talked in our group about looking at how things are framed in terms of like, is it framed as like the economic benefits of conservation agriculture? Is it a stewardship focus? Is it, what are the sort of other frames that are used in posts? And we haven't gotten there yet. And a lot more kind of a deeper dive and to give some more kind of substantial results to what we've looked at so far. I have no idea where I am on time, but I will stop there. And I think I'm way over, but thank you for your patience.
This was great. I gave everyone an impossible task. I gave a bunch of acacademics a
I
challenge
know.
of
Do it.
5 to 6 minutes, so we could kind of do a series of flash talks. But that's an impossible task. But that was awesome. Thank you so much. Really interesting to see how you incorporated those tools too to help derive some meaning from that data. We're excited to see what you do next. And speaking of next, we have Dr. Lisa Pitlick-Zillig, our trust scholar. She works with the Smart Lab and helped create the Smart Lab's predecessor, the Public Insight Lab, years ago. She's a senior research manager at UNL's Public Policy Center. A pioneer in the research areas of trust and confidence. And we're super excited to have her share some of what she's learned and some of her research and some of the research the data that came out of the Smart Lab about restorative justice.
Thanks. Oh, it is so exciting to see everybody's stuff. And Heather, I'm going to have to like pick your brain on some of these other tools. So the prior 2 talks went way into heavy analyses. I'm going to take a little turn into something a little smaller, lower key. But what we were trying to look at is how people discuss restorative justice. So we had a grant that was helping to implement and expand restorative justice in Nebraska specifically. So we did not look across the entire United States. We really wanted to know what Nebraskans thought. So we were especially interested in 2022 when the grant started, what were people's levels of awareness and what were their perceptions of restorative justice like. And then how or did they change as we were working with the 6 mediation centers across Nebraska? So every corner of Nebraska is covered by some sort of mediation center, and they were implementing, especially in schools, more restorative justice techniques to deal with conflict and just offensive behavior by youth, I guess is how we say it. So we were using Smart Labs data, the social media, traditional media data, just to see what the conversations were in order to triangulate findings and clarify our understandings of perceptions and help us understand any changes. So we were also, in addition to only honing into Nebraska, we were also honing into 2022, the baseline, and then not quite all of 2025 because, you know, we had to close out the grant in September, but 2024, 2025, what were people talking about? So the social traditional media that Smart Lab scraped for us covered approximately the beginning and end of this grant. And we also had available to us random sample survey data from the Nebraska Annual Social Indicators Survey done by Bozer. So this was kind of a nice little design. Like, not only are we going to see what these attitudes are and be able to weight the data according to population statistics, but we're also going to be able to see what the conversation is among Nebraskans. So for the social traditional media, we used, and I should say we generally, AKIB used with guidance from Valerie and Brian, used backfill data for all of 2022 and then also for 2025. And then we also did some active listening. I don't think it wasn't the whole of 2025. I'm forgetting the exact dates. But we did active listening also in 2025. And we used both keyword search and we tried to use geographic search to cover Nebraska. So just so you get a sense of what our survey measures were, since the NASA's, the Nebraska Annual Social Indicator Survey, since it's a compilation of many researchers' questions, you don't put very many questions on. So we have these as our two main questions that were on that survey. We did have some other attitude ones, like people's attitudes towards punishment, attitudes towards like the goal of helping a victim in a crime. But these are the two main ones that I'm going to talk about today because they're focused on awareness. Had people ever even heard of restorative justice? It's not actually something that, you know, comes up in my day-to-day conversation unless I'm talking about this project. And then what do people, when they're given a little explanation of what it is, which we gave everybody because we expected quite a few no's or unsures, when they're told what it is through our lens, what do they think about it? Do they think the restorative justice approach seems better than a traditional approach, or do they think a traditional approach seems better than the restorative justice approach? We did not give much of an explanation of traditional because we figured most people knew that, but we did give a longer description of the restorative justice one and then ask people how much they liked it or disliked it based on that. And then as far as the sprinkler search goes, as you can see, we used the same base query for the location and the keywords query, but the location query, AKIB sent the circles around Omaha and around Lincoln and then around other cities, especially if they had the mediation centers in them. We focused on those cities. So we are getting a little bit more urban than rural discussion, but we figured that was sort of okay because that's where most of the people are and there would be spillover. So we aren't really able with the sprinkler data to compare urban and rural, but we are able to get a sense of, well, what are people talking about in 2022? What are they talking about in 2025? Or who's talking? So a couple of observations that we had. First of all, we're looking at, I'm going to talk about quite a bit less data than the prior talks, because we were really looking at, okay, so, you know, we're very grateful to Kev for going and getting the posts for us. So I'll show you some of those actual posts. So we weren't just like looking at spreadsheets of data or running numbers through the analyses, but actually looking at them. So one interesting thing we noticed was that in 2022, it seemed to be kind of top-down businesses, right? So we had some businesses posting things about their programs and about their love of restorative justice, or maybe institutions is a better word rather than, because they could be nonprofit or whatever. We had two we had two prolific posters that showed up in 2022 and 2025 among those top 8 that Sprinkler spits out. And even that seemed a little different. So the Community Justice Center, as you can see in 2022, they were really pushing out the posts. They had 202 posts that came up with our search terms. So that means they were talking about restorative justice in some way, shape, or form. And then this is a individual. So we didn't have as many individuals show up in the prolific posters, but by 2025, that individual was posting more and the institution was posting less. Now we did still, among those prolific users, we did still have somewhat more posts, but what that meant is that we did have more individuals kind of sharing some information compared to the more business institutional accounts. We also did notice that, oh, okay, it looks like the conversations are getting more negative, which, as you can imagine, isn't exactly super happy for those of us who are like trying to broaden the use of restorative justice in Nebraska. But one thing about these data, these are before we went in and looked, and we're not done looking more line by line at the posts, like, are these really from Nebraska? Are they, because remember, we're trying to focus in on cities and places in Nebraska and people in it. So people in Nebraska could repost things from other places. That's fine, but there had to be some link to Nebraska. Either it had to be about Nebraska. Well, first of all, it had to be an entity that we thought came from Nebraska, not. I suppose if California posted something about Nebraska, we still wouldn't include them because they're not our Nebraska conversation. So I don't know what this will look like once we do a fuller cleaner, but it's not looking very happy so far. But when we go look at the actual posts, there's also some very interesting texture to the posts themselves. One thing that we noticed was that in 2022, when there were more institutions posting, when the bulk of it seemed to be institutions, they were pretty much posting like how happy they were about their programs, or look, we're doing at UNL, we're doing a micro credentials course, or we have this restorative justice conference when my colleagues were presenting on actually our funded project, or the Community Justice Center doing its restorative justice and having graduates of programs. In contrast, in 2025, what we saw is that even though, as you saw on the last slide, CJC might have been sharing less of its posts, there were more institutions now sharing each other's posts, as well as individuals sharing them. But it did seem like that we got more engagement as of 2025, both in terms of individuals posting and in terms of institutions sharing each other's work. The thing about the negative posts, when we went and looked at the negative ones and some of the new ones classified as neutral, so you're wise, Heather, to go ahead and do your own sentiment analysis, because it is true that some of the things classified as neutral by Sprinkler ended up being negative. What we see when it comes to negative content is just a lot more variability, right? A lot. And this is actually, I've seen this in other, like in my trust research, there's more ways to be negative than there are to be positive. For positive, you like everything. Like there's not a lot of variation there, but any little negative thing there, like you could have different negative things making you feel negative. So some of the critiques are focusing on the perception that restorative justice is not fair, that it's too lenient, that it's ineffective, and maybe even increasing crime. And, you know, from a political standpoint, that it's associated with radical racial ideology. So those are quotes. One notable thing missing, though, is that the Nebraskans who were posting about, so first of all, it's not institutions for the most part, it's individuals posting negative things, and they're not referring to programs in Nebraska. They're referring to news articles. They're sharing things from others that don't have anything to do with our evaluation of how restorative justice is working in Nebraska. And also, we just because there were more institutions doing the posts in 2022, it was a lot, all of these here from 2025, it was a lot harder to find negative posts in 2022. So now, before I reveal, I just got the survey data yesterday afternoon. So I thought I was just going to say, so our next steps are to see what the survey says. So I'll give you a little quick peek. The survey did show that there does seem to be a decline in preference for restorative justice. So these are the weighted means. I haven't done a full analysis. Like I said, I just got it yesterday, but I did at least do a one sample t-test on the 3.54 to say, well, is that significantly different from 3.91? And that was significant. We'll do a better two groups test later, but it is looking like the trend is for Nebraskans to be decreasing in their preference for restorative justice. The other thing that is kind of interesting, that when it came to awareness, we did not see an increase exactly in overall awareness. We saw an increase in people being sure that they were or were not, had or had not heard of restorative justice. So the yes, we heard of it went from 33% to 36%. I don't know if that's significant or not, but the no, we haven't heard of it also went from 45% or almost 46% to 48%. It's the number of people who said they're unsure that decreased from 22% to about 16%. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. Maybe that's just noise or whatever, but I'm not seeing a strong trend for suddenly everybody being aware of it, which I thought, given the national conversation, despite, on the one hand, we have our efforts to increase it in Nebraska, but on the other hand, we have the national conversation, and I think restorative justice was listed as one of those phrases that ought to be scrubbed from everything. But I don't know, maybe that's part of the clarity. Like when you start using the word in the national conversation, people just feel more sure that they've heard of it or not. Anyway, I would welcome ideas about what to do next with that. But like I said, our main next things are to actually analyze it correctly. And then look at the attitude measures where we actually ask about people's preferences for justice outcomes. Like, what do you think, especially since this was focused on youth, we actually asked specifically about youth, right? When a youth is known to have committed a crime of some sort, what do you think the process should have as an outcome? Should it be to punish the youth? Should it be to involve their family? Should it be, and in Nebraska, at least, involving family got pretty high. I'm done. Okay. Challenges and considerations. We found a lot of noise in the geographic focus searches, which is why I've stayed away from some of the metrics until we can clean it more. So the metrics might not be comparable. And yeah, I think when you're doing this work, as Heather mentioned too, you need to spend some time cleaning the data and looking at it carefully. It's kind of don't think of it as a shortcut. These individuals are a little different. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I went over.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Great example of kind of the wide range of topics that we've covered. You've also heard a few times mention of this mythical person called Akib, who's our graduate research assistant, who we're so grateful to have. He's a PhD student in computer science and used to be a data analyst at Uber. So we're grateful to him to help our team. All right, another step on the path of wide-ranging topics. We have Jessica Walsh. She's an assistant professor in the College of Journalism and Mass Communications. Her research focuses on rural and local journalists and their roles in a networked community, particularly how national and local journalists use social media to report the news. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay, do you see my slides? Did I do this right? Okay. Yes, I will talk about data cleaning, but I will also talk about how data cleaning can lead to another study. So I have been on 3 studies using sprinkler data we pulled data from 2022. By we, I mean Dr. Kelly Bowling, who's an ad PR professor in our college. We got together. This was her idea. She had a great idea. Let's look at sprinkler data from the time when Politico reported that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned to the time that the Supreme Court actually overturned it. It was a span of a couple months. And so we pulled, using Sprinkler, a ton of, at the time they were called tweets. Now I'm calling them posts. I can also talk about that, how we've managed in the articles we've actually got published using Sprinkler data, how we've navigated the, like, it used to be Twitter and now it's X, and like, what do you call it? And will people still publish stuff if it's, you know, because of all the disruption? Anyway, yeah, so these studies will be, these slides will be pretty high level because we've already published. So I'll just talk briefly kind of about the process. And what I've loved about this sprinkler data is that we've done qualitative and quantitative studies using the data. We've looked at influencers versus regular people. And as Lisa said, we did have to do a lot of data cleaning, but I can talk about how that was actually a good thing. Here's the 3 studies that I've been talking about. One of them is under review, revise and resubmit. So hopefully we'll be getting some news soon about this last one. But the one that was most recently published was actually published in a sports journal. And the way it came about actually is we were going through the all of the tweets that we pulled for the study that I'll talk about in a minute that we did on just journalists in general, and, you know, broadly how they talked about the Roe v. Wade leak and like sort of how they like covered it on social media. But as I was looking through the data, we were going through and cleaning it, getting rid of like screenwriters and like authors and like people who weren't actually journalists, which was really time consuming. And I was going through the data and I was like, why are there so many sports journalists who are tweeting about Roe v. Wade? It was just like one of these things that I noticed. I was like, okay, this seems odd to me because they're not covering it, but they're commenting on it. And so this was, again, the second study that we did. But we found that the most of the comments about Roe v. Wade were not about women's rights, and not a lot of times even about women's sports. They were just the person's strictly their opinion, the sports journalist's opinion about Roe v. Wade. So you'll see through these slides kind of the process that we went to, and it sounds similar to what Heather did, is we got a ton of posts. We did, in this case, a lot of screening to get rid of duplicates and people who weren't journalists. And, you know, through a pretty lengthy process, we were able to home in on just the sports journalists, and that we ended up with 880 posts. We had a grad student who worked with us for 2 of these studies because 2 of them were content analyses. And I actually didn't do the coding. It was him and Kelly, Dr. Bowling, that did the coding. And what we wanted to really, you know, sort of understand was how were these sports journalists contributing to this conversation? And we'd already known through doing a lot of research on this topic that journalists are just happy to express their opinions on social media, and it kind of goes against some of the traditional journalistic norms. And it's something that I'm really fascinated by, and continues to be getting a lot of, you know, kind of research dedicated to it. So these are some of our cues. And no surprise, Dr. Bowling is a feminist scholar, so this went in that direction. I think, again, like, it was really, again, because of just the process we had to go through with this data, we ended up with this really unexpected study that went in this really unexpected way. We were not planning to do this study. It just kind of happened. 2 other professors in our college joined in on it. So like that was really fun too. So who were sports professors, we asked them to join us because they could add their sports media expertise. And like that was just really a great project. But yeah, I think we also found something interesting is that symbolic annihilation is going on broadly in the mass media. So that was no surprise, but it was interesting to see that particularly it was happening in the sports journalism world on social media, and that a lot of the conversations were really not about women and women's rights, but were about other things. So that study was, again, just kind of a surprising, kind of happy accident, I guess, of the process of going through all of those tweets. So I'll talk very briefly about this. This study was published a couple of years ago. And this was the similar. We started with a ton of, I had the data somewhere. Yeah. We started with a ton of tweets and then narrowed it down. We did an nth select of the tweets. And then I would not recommend this, but Dr. Bowling and I qualitatively coded these tweets. So it was really time consuming. But again, interesting. We were really trying to understand how journalists were contributing to this conversation online. And we found that similar in the way that journalists just report on the news, that there was a speed over depth sort of mentality, and that it did kind of follow this 24-hour news cycle pattern that you see in the news media that was happening on social media. Again, you can look up the study if you'd like, so I won't spend too long on it. But in the process, we found that there were kind of 4 topics that journalists talked about: breaking news, the politics of it. I mean, it kind of was like a stage. So it was like breaking, and then it was all about the politics of it. And then it was like, here's how it's affecting real people in this state. And it was really a pattern that we saw, that they kind of followed this kind of progression of reporting. And sorry, my computer's being jumpy. Okay. So that was, again, like a different way of using this data for a different topic in a different study. And here's just some more of the findings that we found. Like I said earlier, one of the things I love about working with this data is that it can kind of lead to unexpected places, and it can lend itself to quantitative and qualitative analyses. And we didn't look at sentiment, and we also didn't look at geography, but you can. We were really focused on content. We didn't look at gender. We wanted to, but because it's not really reliable to kind of parse out someone's gender from a Twitter bio, we didn't do that, but we did think about it and we wanted to. So these are just some of the findings. And then finally, this is our final study that is will hopefully be published soon. And this was also a content analysis. Or maybe I have some slides on this. Again, very similar. We're using this same data that was coded data for like these different, sort of we started with the same data and then kind of worked our way through it. One different thing about this study was that we really emphasized comparing analyzing the influencers using the Sprinklr's influencer score that they give you. I think we use 90 and above. So we were more interested in how the really kind of like elite media contributed to the civil sphere in their conversations about the leak and about the decision. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Great examples of how. So Jessica did get the data before like this year, so she's had a little more time.
Yeah, couple years.
She was an early adopter, but great example of how this is publishable, but also how even looking at this data can lead you in maybe some unexpected but interesting and research-worthy directions. Next, we have Dr. Julie Lee. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Agribusiness and Food Industry Management, Agricultural Sciences at Cal Poly Pomona. And she is partnering with a professor, Dr. Jody Hirschbach at University of Nebraska-Kearney. But Dr. Lee is going to present with us today. So thank you so much for being with us. Her research focuses on modeling and simulating the market and welfare effects of food policy and agricultural technology, such as CRISPR-edited beef. So she's going to share a little bit with us today. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Valerie. Hi, how are you? My name is Yoongyang Julie Lee. I'm working as assistant professor of agribusiness department in California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. In this project, this collaboration with Dr. Jody Harchenbach. She's also assistant professor of marketing, agribusiness, and supply chain management in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Actually, I'm a UNL alumni back in 2022. Yes, I did my PhD in agricultural economics, working with Dr. Konstantinos Giannakas. So I feel like Lincoln is my hometown. I've been spent like more than 7 to 8 years with my husband, who he also pursued his PhD in mechanical engineering. So it's just such an honor to be back to UNL virtually still, but it's amazing opportunity for me to share this research that we've done. Today I want to talking about a little bit about the public emotions and perceptions of CRISPR edited technology, particularly its use in cattle, in collaboration with the UNL Smart Lab. And we're trying to gather some insights from social media to connect these public sentiments to future research directions. To give everyone a bit of background, some of you might have heard of CRISPR technology, while for others it might be new. CRISPR is essentially a tool for the DNA editing, and it allows the researchers to alter DNA sequences and modify the gene function. So I think that most of you are probably familiar with the genetically modified organisms like GMO, like a GM corn or soybeans, and definitely Nebraska is a corn and soybean state. And the key difference with the CRISPR is that it's a non-transgenic form of gene editing, and that means that this technology does not inserting any foreign DNA. CRISPR, one of the benefits of the CRISPR technology is definitely can precisely cut out and alter some undesirable genes directly within the organism's own DNA. And what we are, based on that, like what we are ultimately focused on in our research is that try to understanding some economic potential of the CRISPR edited cattle. As you can see on the top right corner, there's those pictures of sleek coat cattle, which is the CRISPR edited cattle, while the right side is the regular cattle. And definitely CRISPR edited cattle has a much shorter hair, which has resistance to the heat waves, and also have a better productivity and also decrease in terms of mortality rate. So that's what we are trying to navigate is definitely CRISPR technology, especially used in the livestock, and especially for the cattle. Lots of consumers have some sort of fear and negative perspective point of view, but we are unsure that what it look like exactly. So that's why our collaboration with the UNL Smart Lab was so important. We trying to get a help like from their expertise in social media and consumer sentiment analysis, so that we could help us to understand how public perceptions actually look like. To understand how people feel about CRISPR, we try to look at some of the analyzed data from the millions of the online conversations about the CRISPR across the multiple platforms, including X and Reddit. And what we found was quite telling. And as you can see that most of the discussions about CRISPR edited foods were either neutral or negative, and about 46% were neutral, while 44% are have a very negative perceptions, while only 10% were clearly positive. So definitely from that, we really wanted to understand these public's emotional landscapes to inform that what would be the better science communications policy discussions later. When we look at the emotions, the participants' emotions about the CRISPR edited food, is that, as you can see, that there's lots of negative perceptions and emotions was involved in this subject. As you can see that 29% was anger, 30% is a disgust, and 2% of the fear. That says about like 65% of the the data shows that there's a very negative emotions related to the CRISPR edited beef and technology. This is also like how the emotions has been changed from 2022 to 2025, and definitely anger and disgust is rising since 2023. I think that although there's a lot of CRISPR technology has been utilized in the plant science and also the animal science in a various way, but like we didn't really have a pay attention to how we're going to communicate this new technology that we're going to be already utilized and commercialized in the food industry in the United States. So what we learned is that definitely CRISPR discussions are still negative, and that reflect lots of ethical and safety concerns. And there's lots of fear, distrust, and uncertainties definitely dominate and around the human and food applications. We could find there are very few positive voices that emphasizes innovation and disease preventions. But I think the main takeaway from this collaboration is that there is a communication gap between scientific progress and the public understanding. So we are currently working on the two proposal for getting a bigger grant from the national level and state level. First project is we wanted to know that a little bit more producer side, definitely linked with the consumers and producers, but we navigate what is the economic potential of the CRISPR edited cattle. And also in terms of our second proposal, we definitely wanted to know that how we're going to shape the gene edited beef messages, or maybe in general, like how we could communicate this CRISPR edited food with the public, not just because just persuaded this is good enough or ethical enough and not that proposed. We are like trying to get to know that what would be the way that promoting informed decisions about CRISPR edited foods for the consumers. So that's what we learned in for the future project. And thank you so much for this opportunity to share this research project. And I was so enjoyed with all the process working with the Smart Lab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I love it. Always a Husker at heart, but now you're just a Husker among palm trees that the rest of us are jealous of.
It's actually raining a lot these days, so yeah, don't be jealous. This is just a photo of maybe during May or June.
That looks lovely. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We are at time at 1:31. And so we appreciate the projects that were shared, and hope that this is the start of some regular collaborations, and this helps demonstrate the wide range of applicability and utility of this kind of data. If we have brilliant researchers like yourselves who can convert it into meaningful insight. So thank you so much for that. And we hope to see you in future Smart Lab discussions. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.